Okay. Give me a list of top rule frustrations for dungeon masters that need a good home brewing. I'm talking about the rules and aspects of D&D that make the game less believable or enjoyable. You give me the list and leave the homebrewing to me. Okay, sounds good. Trivial death, alignment restrictions, spell components, track. Okay, alright, you know what? Let's just focus on that first one here if we can. Trivial death. With the introduction of spells like Revivify, Raise Dead, and Resurrection, character death can become trivial in D&D. This could lead to players not fearing death and making riskier decisions, which could in turn reduce the overall tension and challenge of the campaign. I agree. Let's see if we can homebrew that, because why not homebrew everything? I'm sure that most of you have played in a D&D campaign where absolutely no one died, or a campaign that started at level 5 because, well, at level 5 you basically have Narcan and a defib in any cleric or druid. I've been in literal sessions where somebody said, "Don't worry, I made 2 of my death saves." And another where I was told to leave someone in the abyss because we have a lock of their hair back at home and we'll just truly resurrect them. Now, of course, if you are in an inconvenient place in your game and somebody dies, you're gonna have to get that revivify off in the first 10 rounds, but that's not hard. Now, let's be honest, the game of Dungeons & Dragons has lost its teeth. It doesn't have a lot of actual rules that help dungeon masters make the game challenging for you. CR is a joke. Power creep is getting stronger and stronger with CR staying pretty much the same. And I love Dungeons and Dragons. I'm merely saying that if you want a truly balanced campaign or want your DM to give you any magic items whatsoever, it's heavily reliant on us dungeon masters to make the game challenging. And although there are adventures and campaign arcs and encounters that can be exciting, the ultimate adventure is one where you try not to die. Which means the threat of death should be present and should be something that drives your decision making. What I'm arguing is that death does not matter, rules as written, any longer. You see, death in the first 2 levels is actually almost a hard thing to avoid, rules as written, which is why a lot of campaigns start off at level 3, where it is my opinion that you have about 2 levels of well-balanced gameplay before death means nothing. Hear me out, because this problem doesn't actually start with death. To me, it starts with damage. You see, when I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I was told that any monster or ally that was below 50 hit points was considered bloody. This means that the damage taken after that point is like real damage, fatal damage, and when you hit 0 hit points, you are unconscious and bleeding out. Now, I don't think that that's changed very much, except that now we have the non-lethal option. Let's take that non-lethal option and realize what we're saying. It's basically like you beat somebody down so bad that you were able just to knock them out with the blunt end of an object or your hand, and then they go unconscious, allowing you to tie them up. Now, it is my opinion that this already has too few consequences. All someone needs to do is heal you back 1 hit point, and you can pop back up like nothing happened, fire off whatever spells you want, or go in attacking, and basically acting as though nothing had changed between when you went unconscious and when you came back. It sets up a pretty unrealistic attitude towards being knocked out. Now I know what you're gonna say.
This is a fantasy world. There's magic.
But sometimes adding more consequences makes a game better. It makes it more entertaining, it makes it more fun, and you get to deal with more things strategically that matter in the future. The second problem is one of time, and I'm not exactly sure how Dungeons & Dragons wants to deal with this in the future. The idea that 1 minute in combat is 10 rounds of combat, and out of combat, 1 minute is extraordinarily short time that isn't actually timed. We just play it in the real world based on the DM's discretion. So in-game, Revivify outside of combat feels like you have a very short time period, there's a rush, a mad dash, but in combat feels like you can take your sweet time. Not only that, but the cost of resurrecting humanoid life is incredibly low. Like, I'm not saying that like it's nothing. Of course it's fairly expensive, but any 5th or 6th level adventuring party who's taken on a significant horde or beaten a big boss or even snuck in and stolen something from the coffers of a small town would have more than enough gold to bring back multiple people in the party. It wouldn't even be difficult considering that most adventuring parties ask their healers to keep that spell slot open for dead party members. And because the consequences of death are so low, people kind of shake it off when they die. Unless, of course, they die and nobody's able to get to them in time to cast Revivify, in which case it's a little bit harder until later levels. All of these things and more contribute to a feeling of lightness when it comes to death in Dungeons & Dragons and puts all the responsibility on the DM to make death important. Now, you guys didn't just come here to hear me rant about death in Dungeons & Dragons. I could do that, but that's not going to be helpful. So let me give you some DIYs on death and see if we can make our home games a little bit more consequential. So moving forward, we're going to talk about how to manage going down, getting knocked unconscious, and what consequences can be for death, and even a third rule that can make your party, if they want to, really excited about death, but also bring some balance to the death resurrection kind of scales. My first homebrew rule is if you go down, you get exhaustion. Every single time. Here's a scenario. Your overeager barbarian runs into a room getting hit by a bunch of traps and goes down. Before they even have an opportunity to make a death saving throw though, the paladin comes up, does lay on hands for a couple of hit points, and that barbarian's back on their feet. In my game, the barbarian now has a single point of exhaustion. The barbarian gets knocked down again, down to 0 hit points. Gets picked up again, 2 points of exhaustion. This adds a small, overcomable consequence to your players getting knocked out. As a longtime martial artist and huge fan of mixed martial arts, I know if you get knocked out, you're not normal for a while. You are not just going to pop up and be able to adventure at full capacity. I don't think it should be that bad unless it keeps on happening. So the more times you get knocked out, the more consequences there are. In my games, it takes 1 long rest to get rid of a point of exhaustion, but if you want to relax an entire day, you could get rid of 2. If this seems a little bit extreme, you could always tweak the rules around exhaustion. Instead of a long rest being necessary to remove however many points of exhaustion, you can make it a short rest. I continue to use exhaustion into Revivify. If you get revivified, now you are at max. And I mean max points of exhaustion before death, meaning that you just died and came back and are not moving, you are not able to attack, kind of useless. The party's gonna have to carry you or get rid of those points of exhaustion. Another thing that it does is it gets you closer to death that would come from being knocked out. Say that same barbarian died and then is revivified by the cleric. Now they have all these points of exhaustion, and even if they're able to get rid of one of them, they have to be very careful about being knocked unconscious. This is a more consequential vibe for someone dying. Yes, we can bring them back, but when do we bring them back? We have to get to them in 10 rounds, but if we get to them too early, they might get knocked down and die again. And how many times can we do this? This adds an element of strategy and tension between the amount of time that you are given to resurrect someone. Out of combat, you get to them as fast as possible. In combat, now you have to kind of gauge more elements. My last homebrew death rule has 2 parts. The first actually came from my DM Josh. It is having 3 life threads essentially connected to you. Now, every time that you are revived, one of those threads gets cut. Think kind of like the fates. Once your 3rd string is cut, you pop directly into the Shadowfell where you await processing because you are dead, my G. But the second part of this rule I think is kind of interesting. It allows your riskier players who may not be so attached to keeping their player alive long term an opportunity to make things more meaningful when it comes to death. Let's bring back said barbarian. He dies outright, let's say catastrophic damage from doing something stupid like jumping off of a high cliff, thinking that he'll be able to dive into the water thousands of feet below. The party retrieves the body and resurrects the barbarian. Before returning to the land of the living, the barbarian decides he wants to barter away his remaining threads of fate. By doing this, a player can give away their potential to be brought back in the future in exchange for a feat of their choice. Maybe you think that's not a great trade-off, but for a player who really is just having fun and has no problem changing characters throughout a game, there's an incentive to create more story and drama later, knowing that if they die again, that's the end. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I really did. I really wanted to show you guys how I homebrew everything, and hopefully it helps out your games. If you have any homebrew rules on death, please leave them in the comment section below. Also, make a major hit of the like button and hit subscribe if you're interested in watching more of this. Thanks. Peace.